You're doing it wrong. What are 10 mistakes that most people make when they are creating their very first podcast? Hi, I'm Jennifer Lee and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about mistakes. We all make them, so don't worry. But it's better to know about them before you start the journey of podcasting because, as we know, podcasting is a lot of work, but there can be a lot of reward for it. So let's get into it. Let's start with mistake number one. Mistake number one. Not planning your podcast. A lot of people just say, hey, I want to have a podcast. And I ask them, what is your podcast about? And they said, I don't know. And I was like, oh, okay, you got to figure out exactly what it is. Or they'll have an idea and they'll be like, I want to talk about how to create a successful business. Awesome. And I was like, what else do you want to talk about? Do you have a structure? Do you know if it's going to be an interview style podcast? Is it going to be a solo podcast? Is there going to be an episode with a panel of experts? And then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, okay, I didn't even think about that. Or think about what are the topics people are actually Googling in that sphere. So if it's like, how do I start a business? You might want to figure out what are the episodes out there that people are listening to that are similar that I can also put my own unique spin on and follow that formula. So again, you really need to figure out, you need your roadmap. You can't just hit the mic and be like, I'm starting the podcast. You need to know exactly what your podcast is all about. Not being conversational on your podcast and ignoring your audience. Something that I learned as a broadcaster back in the day was one-to-one communication. And one-to-one communication is so important because even though you're talking to thousands of people, you're actually talking to one person at a time. You want to make sure that they are included on the journey with you. You don't want to be like, oh, hey, everybody, I'm talking to everybody. No, if I'm in my car or I'm walking the dog or I'm cooking dinner and I'm listening to your podcast, I want you to be talking to me. I want to feel special. I want to take the journey with you. So making sure to have that one-to-one communication is so important. And going back to step number one, planning, having those podcast outlines, so important. Create a podcast outline because that is going to help you with your planning stage. You're going to know what the episode's about. It's still going to be able to come off natural, but being able to give you that conversational style because you know what you're talking about. A lot of people don't plan or prep, and a lot of people don't use the one-to-one communication. So make sure you plan, prep, and communicate. Mistake number 3, not having proper equipment. Really important. Poor audio quality is really bad for a podcast because no one's going to listen to you if the sound is really fuzzy. I had a really good analogy that was told to me in broadcasting school, and they said, if you have the most perfect, beautiful video and the crappiest sound, people will not watch. But if you have an okay video, a little fuzzy here and there, but beautiful audio, people will listen. Same thing goes for podcasting. What you need to do is get yourself a USB mic if you're going to do virtual, or there's so many different podcast studios out there, and not just large ones. There's a lot of co-working spaces that have podcasts that are able to accommodate you for like little mini podcast studios. They're great equipment. So either set yourself up with a podcast studio, or a lot of libraries too will let you go in to their podcast studios just with your library card, so for free, and you can able to record there as well. So there's a lot of options. If you're going to do it virtual, make sure you have a USB microphone. A lot of people don't have their USB microphone set up properly. First off, not knowing the type of microphone. This is a dynamic microphone. Most people are using dynamic microphones when it comes to podcasting, meaning sound goes in here. Its dead zones are on the side. So if I go off like this, not as clear. A lot of USB microphones that are dynamic have a few issues. They have too many choices. They have a dial that has different formats. So it's dynamic, but then it's omni and other ones. And a lot of people don't have it clicked onto the dynamic microphone. And then not only that, some of the microphones like the Yeti cannot actually be tipped to the side. They have to be straight up and right in front of you. So really knowing what type of microphone you have, where the distance is really important to your sound quality, and making sure that you have a USB microphone, especially if you're doing virtual. Mistake number 4 kind of goes with the equipment, is making sure you have the right recording platform or studio space. So if you're going to use a studio space, make sure that you have somebody that knows how to use that equipment, or you're paying someone that will help you with that. But if you're using a virtual studio, make sure you're actually using a virtual studio like a Squadcast or Riverside. A lot of people use meeting platforms and the sound quality is not there. They're great for meetings. That's what they're there for. But for sound quality, for virtual studio, it's great. It puts everybody on a separate track. You're able to adjust everybody's volume. There's noise cancellation. There's echo cancellation on some of the studios. It makes it a more cleaner product, even if you're doing a video or audio podcast. So there you go. Make sure you have the right software, right equipment, know how to set it up properly. 3 and 4 go together. Mistake number 5. Not being consistent. This kind of goes back to step number 1. Step number 1 could help you a lot. Planning. You need to know how many episodes are you going to do. Are you going to do a season? Are you going to do an episode once every week? Are you going to do an episode every 2 weeks? Whatever it is, it has to be consistent. A lot of people will start a podcast and then they'll get behind and not be consistent. They will stop posting every day on a Monday at 10 a.m. or whatever day they choose. The thing is, your audience is very loyal once it starts going. So you want to make sure that you are good to them, that you keep telling them that this episode's coming out every Monday at 10. If you're doing a season, you can do a season of 8 or a season of 10, how many you want to do. But the important thing with a season is to let people know that it's just a season and you will be back in the following month, whatever that would be. Are you going to take a 2-month break, a month break? And a lot of people don't give enough promotion throughout, taking all that content that they used and keeping it promoted and saying, hey, these were our past episodes. Now we're going into the next season. So very important. If you're going to have a season, just don't leave it. If you're going to do one every week, you better be there. Just got to keep it consistent. Again, doesn't mean you can't take a 2-week break if you're releasing every week, but you got to tell your listeners that you're doing so. So there you go. Be consistent. Mistake number 6, not having a structure. Again, goes back to step number 1, planning. All things are better with a plan. So structure to your episode, not knowing when to stop talking. I'm a radio broadcaster. I still don't know when to stop talking. I probably talked too much through this video, to be honest. So hopefully I'm going to edit some of this out. And if I have it, I obviously haven't learned my lesson, but hey, we're all getting better at it. Know when to stop talking, and editing can really help with this. A lot of podcasts get edited. Editing can mean a few things. In other videos, we can talk about it, but editing for when to stop talking, editing to make sure your sound levels are good and really polished and being able to be heard on all platforms properly. That's another great thing for editing. But the best thing besides having just an editor cut out what's not good is self-editing. And it's something that I had to learn from being a broadcaster. And it all comes down to the format of our radio breaks. We were able to talk on a 30-second radio break and give information in a 60-second radio break. And I utilize that formula for a podcast. So it doesn't matter if your podcast is 1 hour or half an hour. If you're able to get into your podcast and able to get out and you have a beginning, middle, and end and some type of structure, it's not going to sound stiff. It's all about how you deliver it. You just have to have a structure and know when to stop rambling, because really, as much as we think we're great, you probably already said what you needed to say in the first 5 minutes, and it probably sounds awesome. And then you're just kind of giving us extra stuff that we don't need to listen to, like I'm doing right now. So we're going to move on to the next mistake. Mistake number 7. Not promoting your podcast. This one, a lot of people actually don't do, is they have the podcast and they just expect people to find it. Not true. A lot of great podcasters that I know, they are tweeting, no joke. They are putting pre-programmed tweets, or I guess they're called X's now. I don't know. It just ring the same, but They are programming these social media platforms to do like 90 posts a day. Seems a lot. And I see their reason behind it, and they've been successful at it. But again, depending on what platform it is, because different platforms have different rules, make sure that you are at least promoting once a day, whatever your preferred platform is, and make sure you're really getting to your audience. And if your audience is on an email list, make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're on YouTube Shorts. Make sure you're doing it all. But again, it goes back to the other tip. Make sure you're being consistent. Whatever you're doing with your marketing, make sure that it's going every single day. And it doesn't have to be necessarily that platform every single day, but maybe it's Instagram one day. Maybe it's Facebook the next day. Maybe it's other ways. Maybe it's a TikTok. But again, being consistent and really taking the time to build that following. So really promote your podcast and be your own promoter. A lot of people don't talk enough about like, hey, when they have met people at networking events, send your podcast out and be like, hey, listen to this. The more that you can push the podcast, the better. Mistake number 8. Ignoring your analytics, either it be on YouTube or your podcasting hosting platform where it shows all your analytics. A lot of people don't dig into the meat and find out what are your listeners liking. A lot of people will ignore them. If you have one episode that does really well, find out what was the essence of that episode and how do I emulate it to the other episodes so I can get the same return. Look at your topics. If people are loving you talking about food, do more food topics. If there's a certain topic and you're doing a podcast about how to survive building your own business, figure out what that is. Maybe it's like your failures are what people love the most and how you overcome them. Really figure it out. Your audience is giving you clues by listening to different episodes. So really take a look at what those people like and use that as your strategy. And also find out what platforms people are listening to. If you have a huge Spotify audience, really dedicate your time to Spotify. If you have a really huge Apple audience, do the same. Make sure that links that you're sending out to people and you're promoting take people directly there. So they don't need to like do 100 steps to get to your podcast. Really look at your analytics and don't be scared of them. A lot of people will look and be like, oh, it's not 1,000 listens. But if you have people that are consistently listening every episode, say it's 30 people every single time, that's huge. And again, you want to make sure that when you're looking at these analytics, you're not just looking at the downloads because people might not be listening to your downloads. You want to actually look at time spent listening. So if people are listening to 85% of your podcast, that's awesome. And they're continuously doing it, great. But if you're getting thousands of downloads and people are listening to 10% of your episode, why bother? That's not great either. So always look at your analytics. Analytics are your friend. They're not scary. There's tons of gold there for you to follow to be successful. Mistake number 9, overcomplicating your podcast. Figure out what the format is. We talked about it in step number 1. Figure out your format. All part of your plan. All things lead back to number 1 in this video, and it is so important. So figure it out. Am I comfortable with a solo podcast? Because a lot of people don't even think about doing a solo podcast. They just are like, oh, I don't want to do that. Everyone does an interview style podcast, but maybe an interview style podcast is not right for you. Interviews are hard. I talk about this all the time. You have to be able to have good rapport with all your guests. You got to be able to listen. You got to be able to have a conversation. Sometimes, depending on what your format is, a solo podcast actually would be better for you. So figure it out. Or if you're going to have a mix of solo and interview, be consistent. Just don't like do 5 interviews, throw in a solo here. If you are actually going to have different things happen within your episode, like if you're going to have different segments, like a comedy sketch or something like that, keep it consistent. Just don't keep throwing everything into your episode. Have a structure for your episode. Have a structure for your podcast. What format is it? There's tons of formats out there too. There's fictional podcasts. There's true crime podcasts. There's narrative podcasts. Like there's so many different podcasts out there. Figure out what format is right for you and then figure out your episode format's the next thing. It's like, am I just going to talk about this one subject? Am I going to bring a second subject in? But again, be consistent. Don't just throw a whole bunch of things in one episode. Do it right. Mistake number 10, my favorite one, giving up too soon. Podcasts are a slow game. They are a slow growth. I know I depress everybody when I say this, but it is so true. It is slow. Yes, if you get to be one of those people that like luck out like the lottery and all of a sudden get tons of listens, that's a different story. But keep doing it. Keep being consistent. Keep doing all the things that I told you to do in this video. And eventually you're going to get people listening, but don't give up. I remember one client said a poster in their mind, or it was a picture in their mind that they saw, and it was of a gold miner, and he was like in a cave and he was giving up, and they showed on the other side of the rock was all the gold. And again, that's the same thing I like to think about podcasting, is that people don't give it a chance. They don't give it a year. Give it a year. See where it's at. It's a lot of work, but there will be reward to you. So there you go. Those are the 10 mistakes most people make when starting a podcast. Don't make those mistakes. If you want to have any questions for me so you're not making those mistakes, please comment below, ring the bell for more videos like this, and we'll talk to you soon.